Our family's plot of land stood at the outskirts of Lac Vinh, a rural district where winding dirt roads laced through fields of sugarcane and banana groves. My grandfather had built the central house decades ago, rumored to follow the old architectural style. 3 wooden compartments forming the main living area, with a separate thatched kitchen and bath area. Over time, these were replaced with sturdier walls, yet the original deep well remained. My grandparents insisted that the water from that well was especially pure, though I always found it murky and cold. The property was large, sprawling over half a hectare. It held fruit trees, a small vegetable patch, and a tangle of overgrown shrubs near the far boundary where no one ever ventured. My mother used to say, "We have enough land to raise a dozen goats." But those goats never materialized. Instead, the unkempt portion simply became known as the unused corner, overshadowed by old stories of ghostly sightings. Growing up, I spent weekends here, helping my grandmother pick starfruit or feed the chickens. At night, the house felt different, the corridors dark, the corners steeped in shadows. My mother often recounted a strange dream. She saw an ancient lady in a white headscarf, holding a baby in her arms, telling her, "I give you this boy. Take good care of him." My mother believed that dream foretold my own birth. She also insisted that parts of our land were inhabited by unseen forces, ancestors or older spirits that never fully left. When I was 12, I once glimpsed what I thought was a pale figure peering from behind the well. I ran inside, heart hammering, but no one believed me except my mother, who gave me a knowing look. "They watch over us," she murmured cryptically. I didn't visit much after my teenage years. Life took me to the city. Eventually, I returned only after my grandfather passed away. He left the entire estate to my mother and me, instructing us to care for it. That was how I ended up living there again at age 25. Temporarily, I thought. But the events that followed changed everything. I arrived with a couple of suitcases and my battered old laptop. My plan was to stay a few weeks, help my mother reorganize the main house, and maybe decide if we'd sell part of the land. The house was older now, the once bright paint peeled. My mother welcomed me at the gate, looking anxious yet relieved to have company. "It's good you're here," she said quietly. "Strange things are happening again." The well still stood at the center of the courtyard, ringed by mossy bricks. A simple wooden lid covered it, though a gap revealed the dark water below. The orchard remained lively, with papaya, guava, and a single monstrous jackfruit tree near the fence. Past that, the old and used corner lay thick with wild grass. Our first afternoon was spent cleaning. Dust coated the furniture, spiderwebs draped corners. My mother told me that at night, she sometimes heard knocking from the courtyard, as though someone rapped on the well's lid. "It echoes through the halls," she said. "But whenever I look, no one is there." I laughed it off, attributing it to rodents or loose boards. Still, I felt uneasy. That evening, we ate a modest dinner of rice and fish. My mother recounted an old family rumor. A portion of the land once belonged to a childless widow who practiced arcane worship. "They said she was half out of her mind," my mother explained. "She cursed the well for reasons unknown, something about a lost child. No one can confirm the truth, though." The tale gave me chills, but I tried to remain rational. Later, I settled into the front sleeping quarter, the one nearest the orchard. My mother took the middle chamber. The night was still, no city lights or noise. Crickets chirped incessantly, and an owl hooted from somewhere in the orchard. I forced myself to read a book until my eyelids drooped. Around midnight, I half awoke to a faint thudding. For a moment, I thought it was just my pulse. Then it came again, thud thud, a pattern that might be knuckles tapping on wood. My heart kicked. Could it be from the courtyard? The well? I sat upright, straining to hear more. Silence stretched. Then a soft scraping, like nails across a wooden surface. My chest tightened. Gathering courage, I crept to the window. The moonlit yard lay empty, the well-lit shadow stark. No sign of an intruder. I returned to bed, nerves taut. "It's just your imagination," I told myself, eventually drifting into a fitful sleep. I had no idea that was only the beginning. Days passed with no major incidents. We found old family albums, discovered a few battered notebooks that belonged to my late grandfather. Among them were cryptic remarks about the white shape seen near the orchard and instructions never to remove the well's lid after sunset. My mother shrugged, calling it old superstition. Even so, something in my grandfather's shaky handwriting made me uneasy. At twilight one day, I decided to explore the orchard. The papaya trees were in season, fruit drooping from the branches. The path behind them led toward the overgrown boundary. I rarely ventured this far. Tall grass rose to my waist, dotted with anthills. Bamboo clumps swayed. The humidity pressed down, and mosquitoes buzzed. Just as I was about to turn back, a rustling noise froze me. Something moved among the bamboos, too tall to be a stray dog, too silent to be a person. I caught a pale flash, like a face peering between the stalks. My breath caught in my throat. I glimpsed large, dark eyes set in a pallid visage. Then it ducked away with inhuman speed, vanishing into the green gloom. My heart thumped so violently I felt faint. I called out, "Hello?" Silence. Reeling, I retreated to the house. Could it have been a trick of sunlight? A wandering stranger? Or something else? My mother noticed my shaken expression, but I didn't share details, not wanting to worry her. That night, the wind howled around the eaves. Around 1 a.m., the tapping sounds returned, more insistent. Thud, thud, thud. Then the squeak of the well lid sliding. Fear roiled. I turned on the lamp. My mother also stirred, stepping into the hallway. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We tiptoed to the door, peering out. In the gloom, we noticed the lid was slightly askew. A figure knelt by the well. Even from a distance, we saw it had pale limbs, almost luminescent under moonlight, and a head of long, straggly hair. My mother gasped, hand flying to her mouth. We stared, half in shock. The figure seemed to notice us. Its head twisted at a bizarre angle, revealing a blanched face. The eyes glowed unnaturally. Then it hissed, a dry, whispery sound that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, it slithered back from the well and darted across the yard in a blur, disappearing behind the orchard fence. We stood motionless, ears pounding. What was that? I muttered. My mother shook her head, voice shaking. "I've seen something like it before many years ago. In a dream." We bolted the door, hearts thrumming. Sleep was impossible after that. We realized something truly unnatural lurked on our land. In the morning, we found scratch marks on the well lid, thin grooves that suggested long nails. The inside of the lid was stained with muddy streaks, as if wet hands had pried it open. My mother wanted to perform a small prayer ritual. She lit incense near the well, murmuring pleas for peace. The air felt stale. Curiosity drove me to remove the lid in broad daylight, ignoring any superstitions. I peered into the depths. The water was dark, reflecting faint sunlight. I dropped a stone, listening for the plop. My mother grimaced. "Be careful. Our family never told us what's in that well, only that it's old. Possibly older than the house itself." I noticed faint carvings along the interior ring of the well, strange symbols partially eroded by time and algae. They looked like serpentine shapes or archaic writing. My mother dissuaded me from investigating further. "We should seal it," she insisted. "Fill it with earth, maybe build a modern water system. That thing is dangerous." Yet, I hesitated. My memory flickered with old stories, a distant ancestor rumored to have drowned there, sightings of monstrous shadows. Grandpa's notebooks hinted at the snake woman, or a half-human creature. Was it related to these carvings? That afternoon, my mother left for a nearby market. Alone in the house, I decided to read more of my grandfather's notes. Tucked between receipts and weather logs, I found a short entry. "The well predates our family's ownership. Locals say it was used by a widow rumored to worship an underworld serpent deity. She made offerings at the well, hoping for a child. Some claim she birthed something neither fully human nor fully snake. We've witnessed apparitions, white scales glinting at night. Could it be her offspring haunting this place?" A chill shuddered through me. The half-human figure near the orchard. Could it be the same entity my grandfather wrote of? The widow's child? The notion was absurd, but after the last few nights, my rational mind faltered. At dusk, anxiety pressed in. I locked windows, triple-checked the gates. My mother returned, alarmed by my trembling hands. I confided the gist of Grandpa's notes, skipping the scariest parts. She pursed her lips, nodding gloomily. I knew something was off. Perhaps we need to see a shaman or a spiritual elder in the village. That night, we barricaded ourselves indoors. The orchard was dark, shadows swaying under the moon. My mother brewed hot tea, chanting small prayers. Midnight came, and with it, a hush that crackled with tension. Thud, thud, thud. The well lid sound again. We exchanged fearful looks, extinguished our lamp, and peeked through a gap in the door. The moon illuminated a shape by the well. I felt my throat tighten. It was the same figure from before, crouched low, arms strangely elongated. It didn't just pry at the lid, this time. It tugged the rope tied to the water bucket as though searching for something. The entity lifted the bucket. Water splashed across its pale arms. In the faint light, I saw hints of scales glimmering on its forearms. My stomach lurched. Grandpa's notes about a half-snake child scrolled through my mind. The being's face was obscured by long dripping hair. A hissing exhalation broke the silence. Suddenly, the figure turned, as if sensing our gaze. My mother stifled a gasp. The creature's eyes glowed in the gloom. Then it did something horrifying. It rose to full height, revealing a partial tail trailing behind it, scaled and thick. Part of it was concealed by a tattered cloth. The front half of the figure was vaguely feminine, chest and arms shaped like a woman, but the lower portion was serpentine. My mind reeled at the impossibility. Then it let out a low moan, a guttural cry that radiated anguish. The hair along my arms stood. The snake woman lurched away from the well, gliding across the yard, heading for the orchard fence. Her tail scraped the ground with a slithery sound. A putrid odor wafted after her, reminiscent of stale water and rot. We froze until she disappeared among the trees. My mother and I retreated from the door, hearts in our throats. "We're leaving," she whispered, tears brimming. "Tomorrow, I'll get a spiritual priest or exorcist. We can't stay like this." I nodded numbly. Sleep was impossible. The mental image of that half-human, half-reptilian monster burned in my brain. Who or what was she? A damned child? A demon conjured by the widow's curse? My logical sense crumbled, replaced by primal terror. Early morning found us at the home of Old Man Thong, a respected village elder rumored to know about curses and ancient rites. His wooden home clung to the edge of a pond, reeds swaying. We explained our plight in hushed tones: apparitions near the well, scaly limbs, serpentine features. Initially, he frowned, as if reluctant to meddle. But eventually, he sighed and asked about our land's history. He nodded thoughtfully when we mentioned the childless widow and rumors of serpent worship. "I've heard legends," he said. "They say she prayed to a Naga spirit, hoping for fertility. She might have performed unspeakable rituals at that well. Some claim she gave birth to a half-serpent offspring. If such a being truly existed, it could have died violently or hidden away, cursing the place." My mother's voice trembled. "We need it gone. Or put to rest, or something. Please help us." Thong told us to gather certain items: salt, cypress branches, joss paper, and a rooster's blood, a common offering in some local traditions. We also needed personal tokens from the household, hair or a piece of clothing. Then he'd attempt a cleansing ritual at sunset. Armed with instructions, we rushed home. Anxiety gnawed my gut. Part of me feared confronting the snake woman. Would she fight back? Could she be laid to rest so easily? We followed Thong's instructions meticulously, obtaining the items. By late afternoon, we waited in the courtyard, dread thick as storm clouds. Thong arrived in a battered truck with 2 assistants. They set up near the well, placing bowls of salt water and incense around the perimeter. Thong sketched symbols in chalk on the ground. We hovered anxiously, hearts pounding. As the sun dipped, Thong began chanting in an old dialect, sprinkling cypress leaves into the well. The air crackled with tension. My mother clutched my arm, eyes wide. A breeze whipped across the yard, swirling dust. Thong's voice rose in a hypnotic cadence, calling on protective spirits to purge the land of evil. Suddenly, the well water rippled violently, as if something churned beneath. We gasped. Thong tossed in more leaves, then gestured for me to pour the rooster's blood into a separate bowl. He dipped a cypress branch, flicking droplets around. The temperature felt like it dropped. Goosebumps erupted along my skin. Then, from the orchard's edge, a shriek split the air. My mother yelped, dropping her handful of salt. The orchard rustled wildly, branches snapping. I glimpsed a flash of pale movement. Thong shouted for us to remain calm, continuing his chant. The salt bowls rattled. Out of the darkness, the snake woman emerged, slithering with alarming speed toward the well. The assistants cried out, stepping back. Thong brandished a mulberry switch, another protective talisman, and shouted an incantation. The creature halted, hissing violently, eyes locked on the swirl of cypress-laced water. Up close, under Thong's flashlight, we could see her horrifying visage. Human-like lips parted over jagged teeth, the skin around her neck scaled, raw. The tail behind her gleamed an iridescent white. She looked at us with a mixture of rage and despair. Then she lunged. Chaos ensued. One assistant tried to wave the salt water at her. She recoiled momentarily, only to lash out with talon-like nails, grazing his arm. The bowl of joss paper spilled, scattering. My mother screamed. Thong advanced, chanting, dipping his switch in the salt water, sprinkling it toward the snake woman. She hissed, writhing as though burned. A hideous screech tore from her throat. For a moment, her expression flickered from fury to sorrow, like a lost soul in torment. Then she whirled and disappeared behind the orchard fence once more. The yard fell silent except for our ragged breathing. Thong sighed wearily. She's strong. The curse is deep-rooted. One ritual might not be enough. As if to confirm, the well's water kept roiling, refusing to calm. We realized this was far from over. Thong recommended a second, more intense ritual under the full moon, a fortnight away. Meanwhile, he advised us to keep the well sealed, scatter salt around the orchard boundary, and avoid staying outdoors after dark. We tried. 4 days, we sprinkled salt at the fence line, blocked the well lid with heavy bricks. But the snake woman still prowled at night. We heard her movements around the orchard, hissing, snapping twigs, sometimes letting out mournful wails that made our blood run cold. Occasionally, we found trails in the dirt resembling snake tracks leading to the well. Reading more of my grandfather's notes, I discovered a partial genealogical record. Apparently, our family had distant ties to the widow, inherited the land from a relative who was her cousin. Was there a deeper connection? Could that serpent child be a twisted branch of our lineage? The thought sickened me, but also stirred pity. The nights were sleepless, punctuated by nightmares. In one dream, I saw the orchard well from centuries ago, a robed woman chanting at its edge. Suddenly, she was half snake, cackling as lightning struck. I awoke drenched in sweat. Finally, the full moon arrived, casting an eerie glow over the orchard. Thong returned with stronger implements, a hammered copper gong, more elaborate talismans, and a sealed clay jar. We'll attempt to bind her spirit, he explained. If she's truly half human, half serpent, we might persuade her soul to depart or rest. We gathered again near the well at dusk. Tension bristled. Thong hammered the gong thrice, chanting. Incense smoke billowed, forming ghostly shapes in the air. My mother and I held hands, bracing ourselves. Sure enough, once darkness fell, the orchard rustled. The snake woman emerged, gliding across the grass, tail scraping. She paused at the salt barrier. Thong's chanting rose. She hissed, trying to approach. The salt glimmered under moonlight, apparently restricting her movement. She paced the fence line, letting out a guttural cry that reverberated like heartbreak. Thong signaled me to speak to her. My heart hammered, but I managed a trembling voice. We know you were wronged. We release you from this land. There's no place for your suffering. Please, go in peace. For a moment, she stilled, turning those eerie eyes upon me. I thought I caught a flicker of understanding. But then she shrieked, lunging in fury. She jumped the salt line, unbelievably agile. The barrier had limited effect. We scrambled backward. She headed straight for the well, as if desperate. Thong rushed forward, brandishing a burning talisman. The snake woman reeled, but clutched the well lid. With monstrous strength, she flung aside the bricks. The lid crashed onto the ground. Her hand, scaly and inhuman, plunged into the water. We stared, stunned. At that moment, Thong chanted the final incantation, slamming the copper gong. A resonant note filled the air, vibrating with power. The snake woman spasmed, releasing the well's edge. Steam hissed from her flesh, as though burned by an unseen force. She let out a hair-raising wail that soared into the night sky. Light from the moon flared, illuminating her tall shape. For a second, I saw her face contort, eyes streaming black tears. Then her form shimmered, collapsing in on itself as if turned to swirling mist. The orchard fell silent, the only sound the dying ring of the gong. We stood, breathless. The well water stilled, reflecting the pale moon. Thong exhaled, lowering his arms. "It's done," he muttered, though he looked uncertain. Had we truly banished her? The next few nights were unexpectedly calm. No tapping at the well, no rustling in the orchard. My mother began to hope the snake woman was gone for good. Thong advised us to keep sprinkling salt, just in case. Then, on the fourth night after the ritual, I woke to a powerful sense of dread. The air felt suffocating. Something in me knew the snake woman lingered. Grabbing a flashlight, I tiptoed outside. The orchard looked still, no sign of movement. The well lid remained in place, bricks stacked on top. Yet my heartbeat pounded. I ventured toward the orchard fence, scanning with the flashlight. Fog drifted among the trees. My nerves sang with tension. Then I heard it, a faint moan. I followed the sound deeper into the orchard, stepping over fallen branches. The moan grew louder, a throaty lament of sorrow. The flashlight beam flickered on a white shape slumped near the base of the giant jackfruit tree. My blood ran cold. It was her. But she looked different, emaciated, hair tangled, body trembling. The scaly tail was partially visible, but it was fading, as though becoming translucent. She gazed at me with hollow eyes. Not attacking, but lost. Anguish lined her face. Somehow, I mustered the nerve to approach slowly, though fear roiled in my gut. She rasped, voice broken, "Set me free." The words formed haltingly, distorted by her inhuman throat. I realized she was in pain, maybe because of Thong's ritual. A swirl of empathy rushed me, warring with horror. I knelt at a cautious distance. "How?" I whispered. She blinked, tears pooling. A faint hiss emerged. Her lips parted, forming an unearthly language. Then, her eyes flicked to the jackfruit tree behind her. I noticed ancient carvings on the trunk, half hidden by moss. Perhaps an old symbol tied to the widow's worship? A wave of sorrow emanated from her, as if she wanted me to remove the curse sealed in that tree. My flashlight revealed a gnarled scar in the bark. Something was embedded there, like an old dagger or metal shard hammered in. Could that be the anchor for her spirit? Fighting trembling hands, I reached forward. With effort, I pried at the mossy metal. It slid free with a creak, corroded by years of weather. A rush of cold air blasted me. The snake woman's eyes glowed, tears coursing down her gaunt cheeks. She hissed a final time, an exhalation of relief. Then her entire form shimmered, dissolving like mist in the dawn light that crept over the horizon. A gentle breeze stirred the orchard. It was over. She was gone, not forced away by violence, but by the removal of an ancient binding. I slumped to the ground, mind reeling, tears slipping down my face in mingled relief and pity. The house felt different in the ensuing days, lighter, as though the oppressive veil had lifted. My mother noticed it too. We kept the well covered, but no longer heard tapping or hissing. The orchard seemed less ominous, the shadows less menacing. We never glimpsed the snake woman again. Thong dropped by, curious to see if the land remained peaceful. I recounted my final encounter, handing him the rusty piece of metal. He studied it gravely. "Likely a ritual dagger placed in the tree long ago, binding her spirit to this place," he said. "Removing it set her free. In truth, you gave her release more than I did." With the snake woman gone, normal life resumed. My mother considered selling part of the orchard, though we decided to keep the well. Somehow, it felt like we should honor what happened there. The memory of that tortured creature haunted me, yet I also felt a strange gratitude that we'd ended her torment. Occasionally, I recalled Grandpa's notes about the widow who prayed for a child. Perhaps that child truly was born with serpentine traits, a cursed existence. Or maybe it was a spirit conjured from her desperate faith. The truth would remain lost in local legends, overshadowed by time. Before I left for the city again, I performed a final offering by the well. Just incense and a quiet prayer. "May you find peace wherever you are." The wind carried the smoke upward. I imagined a faint presence drifting away, freed from centuries of anguish. Months turned into years. I returned to the city, forging a new life, but visited my mother on holidays. The estate underwent repairs. Fresh coats of paint brightened the living quarters, and a new fence surrounded the orchard. My mother modernized the water supply, though the old well still stood, mostly unused but carefully sealed each evening. Neighbors sometimes asked about the ghost stories tied to our land. We'd smile vaguely, offering little detail. The orchard grew fruitful again, bananas and papayas thriving in the humid climate. My mother claimed she no longer heard strange noises at night. The sense of dread vanished. Still, when I strolled near the orchard fence in the late afternoon, I couldn't help recalling that final meeting with the snake woman. Her sorrowful eyes, the faint glimmer of scales, the voice that whispered set me free. I'd sense a hush in the rustling leaves, as if the orchard remembered her. Sometimes a breeze would swirl leaves in a strange pattern, and for an instant, I felt she might still watch from beyond the mortal realm. Not malevolent now, but grateful. Though we never encountered her again, the memory of her presence remained woven into the soil and roots. Our land, once overshadowed by curses, found a fragile balance. We told ourselves that, if restless spirits roamed, they were at last at rest. On quiet nights, under a bright moon, the orchard lay peaceful and still, no hissing, no spectral apparitions. And in my dreams, the snake woman appeared sometimes only as a fleeting silhouette, dissolving into light, free from the weight of centuries. The well, the orchard, and our home continued forward in time, a testament to how even the darkest haunting can give way to a dawn of release and renewal.